All right, we're now recording.
Okay, great. So Katie, can you please start us off with roll call?
Yes. Mr. Badger,
Here.
Mr. Bleefeld,
I'm here.
Mr. Frank,
Here.
Mrs. Ginsburg. Here.
Okay, great. So Katie, can you please start us off with roll call?
I have a feedback. Sorry. Mrs. Ginsburg,
Here.
Mrs. Heyman,
Here.
Ms. Karyonikis,
Here.
Mr. Stoloff,
Here.
Mrs. Walsh,
Here.
Mr. Antonio,
Here.
Morgan Wilson,
Here.
Sachi Meda.
Here.
9 present, 0 absent, and 2 student board reps this evening.
Thank you. It's time for the Pledge of Allegiance. You can display the flag and please unmute and say along with me. I pledge allegiance
I pledge allegiance
to the
to the
flag
flag
of
of the United States of America
and to the
and to the
republic
republic for which it stands,
one
one
nation,
nation,
under
under
God,
God,
indivisible.
With
liberty
and justice for
And
all.
justice
for all.
for all.
Thank you. So I'd like to welcome everyone to the July 12th, 2021 special board meeting of the Wissahickon School District's Board of Directors. Tonight, we're here primarily to review the district's proposed health and safety plan and the teaching and learning plan for the coming school year. It's just review and discussion tonight, no board action or votes, but we will formally vote on the proposed health and safety plan and the teaching and learning plan at our next special board meeting, which will be next Monday, July 19th. I'd also like to note that the board met in executive session earlier this evening to discuss legal and personnel matters. Item 2 on our agenda is the list of meetings in June. Item 3 is a list of upcoming meetings through the end of August. And with that, I'll pass it on to Jim with our main presentation for the evening.
Okay, thank you. Let me get my screen share cooking here. Everybody see that?
Nope,
How about that?
nope.
How about that?
There we go.
Okay. Okay. Okay, so tonight we're going to present plans for the 21-22 school year, which is coming off of a full year of pandemic and with some leftover effects of the pandemic, both in terms of health and safety and also in terms of teaching and learning. The purpose of tonight, we'll recommend, or we'll share out the recommendations for the 2021-22 school year. And as Joe mentioned, there's no voting tonight. That takes place next Monday, same time, same channel. So what do we learn over the past 18 months? Let's sort of set the table a little bit here in terms of what things are informing our decision-making and our perspective moving forward. First thing we learned primarily is flexibility is key. We were good at that in 2021. We were not perfect at that. We, as everybody recalls, all quite so acutely, we needed to take a marking period in the secondary level, for example, to get the right staffing in place with the right certifications. That was not ideal. We were able to offer some pivot points along the year to change your family's preferred mode of instruction. But we know that flexibility all up and down the plan is key. We know that teaching virtual and in-person students at the same time is not great. I mean, that model was our mode in grades 6 to 12. And teachers reported across the district, across all grades, that while doable, it's just not great. It's most likely that both groups of students, those in person that day and also those at home, got a little shortchanged. Everybody got the same lesson and everybody got the same teachers. That was good, but we learned that's not great. We learned that virtual teaching and learning is doable in a pinch. We did not get rid of all of our snow days like some districts did, but on the other hand, we did use virtual teaching and learning to take the edge off of the number of snow days, so we didn't go deep into June. It's doable, it's not great, but our teachers really responded with some creative lessons, and our students really responded with stepping up to the challenge. And we learned that in-person teaching and learning is the ideal. And that's not really a huge brainstorm, but it is something that reinforced what we already knew. So a little update on the governing agencies that deal with us over the last 18 months. We got to know them quite well, a little bit too well in some cases. At the federal level, we have the CDC. Now, the CDC was silent up until, I think it was last Friday, where they issued this new, or I should say revised set of recommendations. The CDC does not have the authority, it appears, to require things of districts, although that's a little bit up in the air. But in any event, their new recommendations for districts is there's a website there that I linked, and you can just Google it, it's there. They have a recommendation for things like in-person instruction being a priority, masking recommended for those who are not vaccinated, etc. The next level goes to the state, where we have the Pennsylvania Department of Education and also the Pennsylvania Department of Health. They were heavily involved last year, and also with unique provisions that didn't necessarily jive with what the federal government, CDC, was putting out. This year, the word is both of those would like to be more in lockstep, but they haven't yet issued any sort of position on this very recent CDC update. So we're waiting for that. And as you may recall, we also have a county level agency, the Montgomery County Office of Public Health, worked very closely with Montgomery County school districts. I'm very appreciative of their commitment to us. So far, moving forward, last year, I should say, they did have actually some hands-on prescriptive type reactions. If you recall, we were asked to close, or required to close schools for periods of time when things spiked, or in even anticipation of spikes around Thanksgiving. Well, this year, there's an indication that they're going to stay more in the micro level. Things like reporting. COVID is a contagious disease, so we have to report cases. What happens when we have a case in quarantine, that sort of thing. So there'll be a little more in the micro level this year, it appears. And there's one common theme to all of these levels, federal, state, and county, and that is decisions are going to be left to the district, which is in some sense good. There's local control. In some sense, not so good, because people at the local level now get, shall we say, have the privilege of having lots of different viewpoints shared, and we don't have anything to fall back on in terms of, well, we're being told X or we're told Y. Got a lot of recommendations out there and not a whole lot of directives. A very brief medical or science update over the last 18 months. We have expert opinions out there. Many have been shared with me and other people, and very appreciative of all of those. They vary. It's extremely difficult to find consensus on pretty much anything. There's different opinions on masks, whether they should be required or not. There's different opinions on the variants, whether they're a real threat or a minimal threat. So far, we don't know the long-term impact of COVID on children or adults for that matter, because there hasn't been a long-term. There's people studying this and projecting out, but long-haul COVID could be a thing. It could not be. We don't know. We just haven't had enough time to really figure that out. And as we know, the vaccine from various companies has been approved for people 12 and older, but not for anybody under 12. And the best guess from the science medical profession field is that will happen around October or November of this coming fall. So these are the things we're kind of working on, and we're kind of in the background of all of this thinking and decision making and deliberating that's taking place now. So we, as you know, conducted a survey of our 2 different surveys, K to 5 households, and then also a second survey of grade 6 households. So we'll share out those results now independently. The survey window was about 8 days or so in early to mid-June. We got a rather incredible response rate, 83% response, which is very, very high for a survey. And the 3 questions are listed there. Won't read them over, but we'll address each one in detail in a second. And also the responses. One talks about preference in general. One talks about what happens if you do require masks, and one if you don't. And it's important to note that the responses were very similar across all 6 grade levels, K to 5, in terms of the percentage who answered one way or the other. So I didn't break it down by grade, it's by entirety K to 5. So here's question 1, preference for requiring masks in general, and here are the results. You can say they're about mixed, which is probably somewhat predictable given what we hear going on in the country now. There was a size, about 5% had no preference, and then the rest is split roughly evenly between those who would prefer that masks be required versus those that prefer they be optional. So about 50-50 there, roughly. Question number 2 was the one that if masks are required, what would you choose for your child's mode of instruction? Here, we had that same 1,900 plus responses, and an overwhelming majority would choose in person if we did require masks, over 97%. And put in terms of numbers, only 54 people would choose virtual if we require masks, or really only 54 students, which is about 2.8%. Question 3, if masks are not required, what would you choose? What mode of instruction? Slightly different there, actually appreciably different depending on your perspective, but you'll see that the percent of people who go to in-person dropped way down to 82, and then conversely, the percent who chose virtual went up to 17 or 0.8%. So really though, the number, the highlighted boxes there are what we're looking at, which is to say there's 280 more, or almost roughly 89 or so students more who would be in person should masks be required. So that's foreshadowing what everybody's waiting for me to get to, I know, but that's what I'm drawing attention to at this point. Grade 6, sort of the same window, roughly the same response rate. 3 questions were slightly different in that we asked if what would we ask or would we prefer for all middle school students. What would you prefer if we required? What would you do if we required masks only of 6th grade? And what would you do if we required no masks? Here are the question 1 responses. We had about 284 total responses, and if masks were required of all middle school students, only 11 people would choose virtual, 3.87%. This, now, mind you, this is 6th graders, and an overwhelming majority would choose in person. So that was good information to have. Question 2. If we required masks only of grade 6 students and only in grade 6 classrooms, number who would choose virtual went up a little bit to 7.7% or so. And then 3, question, if masks were not required of grade 6, or for that matter, any middle school students, the number of 6th graders who would choose virtual went up to 62, or roughly a fifth of the class. Okay. So the health and safety plan is a state required template. Remember, there's 2 plans for this purpose tonight. There's a health and safety plan that talks about things like mitigation and masking and that. And then there's an instructional plan, which talks about if we're going to offer up a virtual plan, if so, what does that look like? So we're going to do both of them separately. The state has a required template for the health and safety plan. It has similar general mitigation topics as the plan for this recently concluded year, things like face coverings and distancing and cleaning, that sort of thing. And we now have to review the plan every 6 months or whenever there are significant changes to CDC recommendations. So you'll note the link to CDC there, even though with the recent CDC guidance released Friday, this hasn't yet been updated. So we're still going to, in a sense, be driven by what CDC recommendations are, yet Pennsylvania hasn't confirmed that over the last 3 days. The main tenets of the plan that we are recommending are the following. And here's, I know, where people are waiting. Grades K to 5, it is our recommendation that masks be required indoors only for students and adults until January. And we'll talk about those asterisks in a second. Grade 6, same thing, required in grade 6 classrooms only for students and adults until January. And in grades 7 to 12, it's our recommendation that masks be optional. The rationale is that, and we talked about it in the survey results, we'll have quite a few more students in person in grades K to 5 if we do that, if we do what was being recommended here, and a not insignificant amount more in grade 6 as well. Now, as a point of sort of a minor point, face shields are acceptable alternative for adults when teaching. We got some feedback that it's hard, especially in the younger grades, for some students not to be able to see the teacher's mouth, and if you're teaching reading or sort of early grammar year. So that can be done for adults if they'd prefer. And all of this presumes that a vaccine is available by January. So for example, the required masks in grade 5 until January presumes that the predictions hold true and the vaccine will be available, say, in November. And students in grades K to 6 will have opportunity, if they want, to get a vaccine in time. So once we have the winter break over and we get back sometime in January, we could move to masks being optional everywhere because everyone will have had a chance to be vaccinated by that point. That's the rationale behind the January. And it could be, I mean, I suppose January could get pushed back if something happens with COVID-19 or if CDC or Pennsylvania or somebody changes their mind and requires them. So I don't want everyone to think like that's definitely happening, but presuming vaccines are available and there are no developments from one of these agencies, that would be our recommended plan. Continuing with main tenets of the health and safety plan, we envision distancing back to normal with an eye towards maximizing distance, things like at lunch. We can't do the same lunch that we did because we're going to have that many more students back in person. So, we don't have all those rooms that we used to, or at least we did this previous year. But to the greatest extent possible, that's a phrase you're going to hear a lot, we will keep the distancing as much as we can. We'll certainly keep with hygiene and cleaning, maintaining reminders, and we have our staff. Our support staff did an amazing job with established sanitizing procedures. We'll continue the contact tracing only because that's something that Montgomery County has us do so that they can carry out their duties of infectious disease control and mitigation. And it's our recommendations to not require a vaccine of anybody, either a student or staff, And that could change if an agency requires it. I would be surprised if they do, frankly, but right now, no one's requiring it, and we're not recommending that we require it either. And we're also not recommending, by the way, that we have a different approach for masking for vaccinated people versus non-vaccinated people. And I think that's an important piece because some places may do that. And in my opinion, that casts, or I should say that creates an environment where people can make assumptions about whether or not you choose to be vaccinated. And that might get at some personal information that's no one's business. So we're just going to keep it that we're not requiring vaccines. We'll make available opportunities should people want them, like clinics and stuff, but not recommended or not required rather. So our instructional plan is recommended in-person instruction 5 days a week. So that part is back to normal. No hybrid. We'll have a virtual option in all 13 grades with the Wissahickon Virtual Academy, which is the vendor that is provided for through our MCIU, Montgomery County Intermediate Unit. They can tailor it to a district's needs if need be. It's asynchronous instruction. It has some synchronous supports involved, but for the most part, it's asynchronous. It would not be the same virtual option as we provided this past year. And then parents will have the opportunity to choose if they want virtual or not, essentially, by the end of this month. And we have to have it that soon because we have to get some staffing plans in place. We need to know how many people we need where. And then it's our recommendation to have one opportunity to change in January, presuming the vaccine is available by then. Changing involves much more than what might meet the eye. If you're going to change from an in-person to virtual, there needs to be some syncing up of curriculum and teacher observations and connections and things. So rather than have that be many opportunities, we really need to contain it to one in January. And that's natural if we're going to have this turnover from masks being required to optional in January, and we have the semester break and all these things. I think that's the right time to have the changeover opportunity. So we did consider some other options. We considered having some elementary classrooms with masks and some not. Turns out that's not really practical. We couldn't make that work on the scale that we have. We considered our virtual option with Wissahickon teachers instead of the IU's program. Again, that was a little more viable last year when large numbers expressed an interest in virtual. It gets much less viable when only a handful do. And as I think I already talked about, we talked about maybe more frequent options to change, but that just doesn't work logistically, grade-wise, teacher communication-wise, etc. Now, we will be ready to pivot to either a hybrid or 100% virtual should be required by some agency. I mean, we all think we have a sense of where the pandemic is going and the trajectory of things, but just in case we're all wrong, we are building in flexibility, as we mentioned earlier, and building in the ability to pivot should we need to. And the last thing, instructional or interscholastic athletics, to the extent they're instructional, will fully resume, and we'll keep some basic recommended mitigation practices in place, things like not temperature checks, but hygiene, not sharing water bottles, staying apart on buses, things like that. But we anticipate having a full interscholastic athletics program in place. So we're getting towards the end here, I promise. Guiding principles. What principles drove the recommendation? Okay. The first thing is we want as many students in school as possible. That was one of the things we used as a lens to assess options and then recommend these. We feel that 329 more students, 289 at the elementary level and 40 at the middle, matters. That's a significant number. We consider this to be a primary consideration, possibly even the primary consideration. And we feel that finding a common ground matters. So, for example, masks won't be required outdoors. They won't be required of all middle school students, just sixth grade students, and just in classrooms. Or at least that's a recommendation. There's people who would like different outcomes for those variables and many others. We got to try to find some common ground here. So moving forward, we've got a board meeting, as mentioned, next Monday, where the board will vote on the two plans. We'll discuss them a little bit later tonight. We've got that deadline for families to choose virtual or not, July 30th. That means that we have the first part of August to finalize staffing needs. We've got most of it in place now. We'll have the certification issue resolved this year. We've learned from our mistake last year. And our first day of school is August 30th, which is a little late this year compared to other years in terms of the day of August, and no one is complaining about that, believe me. So in conclusion, we as a team pledge to communicate as often and as comprehensively as we can. We learned from last year that the more communicating, the better. It needs to be clear, it needs to be timely, and it needs to be often, frequent. I think this is important, and sorry for the many words here, but I feel like this needs to be said and also brought to the front, is that we know that not everybody's going to agree with every decision. There are quite likely people who don't agree with many decisions that are being recommended tonight. We tried to seek a compromise approach when possible or appropriate. And related to that, we believe in the need to find common ground. If we don't find common ground, and if we don't move forward in a way that's pulling from a little bit of what everybody wants and providing an awesome experience for our students, even though it's not the perfect one that everyone wants, that's common ground. We believe in the need for that. And we believe that this set of recommendations provides for that. So that is the presentation. I will exit shared screen. And Joe, if you want to lead the board in discussion, comments, that sort of thing.
Thanks for the presentation and the outlining of your recommendations. So yeah, board members, I'll maybe just, as you have questions, just signal and I'll call you on each of you guys in turn. Ron has been waving his hand early and often. So Ron, let's have you go first.
Hi, a question about terminology. You said that the separation will be going back to normal. You're talking about the pre-pandemic class arrangements or back to the 3 feet or 6 feet?
Oh, thank you. Answer is, for the most part, there's going to be a blend, but it will be pre-pandemic in the sense that we won't have desks spaced 6 feet apart. In certain classrooms, if the teacher prefers, we might return to a pod kind of arrangement where 4 kids sit around a big table. There won't be any hybrid, so we'll have all the students in a class there at once at the secondary level. So back to normal means like before or pre-pandemic, not during.
I saw other board members have their hands up. I think Amy, and then Ronnie, and then Tracy.
Thanks. So my first question I had was that we had received ESSER funds. Are there any requirements placed on us as it relates to our health and safety plan to keep those funds?
Yes, actually, the need for requirement for a health and safety plan is derived from ESSER. The ESSER is the federal grant, as everybody knows, and we are required to, that's that one point that we are required to review it every 6 months, and in the plan, which we're going to have ready for tonight, we'll post on the website after tonight. We just had to roll that very recent CDC guidance into it, but you have to show in the plan how you're going to address the various recommendations of the CDC, which we had ready to go. And then Friday's new change means we need to have some changes. So we'll get that up on the website. It's document 7.1. 7.2 is instructional plan. That's much less involved, and that's not related to ESSER, believe it or not. ESSER only talks about the health and safety plan, and we will definitely comply with those grant requirements.
So it doesn't have any specific requirements, like you must have masking, you must have certain distances. It's
No,
just CDC guidelines.
You got to pledge to review it every 6 months, or if some condition changes that indicates you should. And in the plan, you have to talk about how you're going to either comply with or at least consider the CDC recommendations on the various things like hygiene and distancing and stuff like that.
Okay, and then the 54 students that would be doing virtual in elementary, do we have anything like that they're all within like 2 or 3 grades? Is there any way that we could have it be with a Wissahickon teacher and be synchronous?
It would be nice if we could. There's not enough students in a given grade level to do that practically. The first problem would be we'd have to group everyone from all the different schools. So it would, which we did a little bit last year, but let's just say we have one kindergarten class of 8. That'll be 2 from Bluebell and 1 from Stony and 3 from Shady, that sort of thing. That is not impossible to do. We just felt that it wasn't the best way to do it. And including the fact that if students come back in January, let's say, that 8 goes down to 4, that's even less of an experience for the 4. You really can't have a class with 4. It's hard enough to have a class with 8 kindergartners, frankly.
Sure. No, I'm just concerned, like as a parent of elementary students, I know how difficult the spring of 2020 was. Yep. With asynchronous. I think that's gonna be very challenging for our elementary students.
No question. It's challenging for second.
Sure, of course.
It kind of depends on learning style, but you're absolutely right. It's challenging. Asynchronous learning in general, depends on learning style, but it's on average, I say, not nearly as ideal as synchronous.
And what's the synchronous support that we're offering with the asynchronous virtual option?
Dr. Dewan has made herself the resident expert on these matters. Would you want to at least try to answer that question, please?
Yeah, absolutely. There are a few different ways that they're able to have synchronous support, and that's with weekly synchronous office hours with their teacher through this MVP, is the Montgomery County Virtual Program. And there's also built-in synchronous chat support. So, and that's 7 days a week. If at any time they need help or assistance or have a question, they can chat with the teacher. And then families can schedule one-on-one student-teacher meetings or family-teacher meetings. And then they have newly established something that they're calling synchronous recess periods with a focus on social and emotional learning and mindfulness lessons for students. So those are the ways in which they'll be able to access synchronous supports.
And I assume like when we ask the final survey, we're going to make it very clear that it's asynchronous. So parents going into that option know that it's not going to be like it was last year.
Yes, excellent point, and we will make it very clear.
Okay. And I just have one last question about next year when students are sick or if they have to quarantine, what's going to happen then? Is it going to be asynchronous again for those students, I assume?
Yes, if any. Well, it depends on duration. I mean, it could be handled if it's like a 7-day one, we can handle that like we do now with any student who's out sick, that their teacher gives them, work to do at home while you're recovering from a broken leg or something. If it's an extended period of time, we can look to get them into the MCIU's program. Entry in and out of that is not easy in mid-marking period. So it might be the case we just have an extended, like we do now, if we have somebody's out sick for a few weeks for mono or something. We hope not to have that too often, but that would be our approach in that example you cite.
Okay, thank you.
All right, next up we had Ronnie.
Just wanted to know what
kindergarten registration was like in our numbers. Is it a lot higher than previous years or lower?
Well, now that you ask, we had last year, and this is very preliminary, but it's a little high. It's current. Our current count as of today is 389. Last year we had you can't really. I don't really know how to compare it to last year because that was different. But that's kind of where it's a little on the high side. It could reflect that some families chose to not go to kindergarten for a year. This isn't. That's not terribly reliable up or down because we're going to have a lot of movement, let's just say, over the next few weeks as things play out.
Okay, thank you.
Tracy?
So just piggybacking on what Ronnie just said, it made me think, I'm sure last year, a lot of parents whose children were going into kindergarten, since they didn't know what our plan was, if we were going to, be in school or not, a lot of them might have chosen to do something else other than Wissahickon for kindergarten. Have we looked at, do we have like an uptick in first grade registration this year?
Initial look answer is yes, but we can't discern just yet if it's any more than our normal uptick. We normally, K-1 is a normal jump because families choose to stay in private kindergarten for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't look to be terribly higher than normal, but we're definitely keeping our eye on that because for the reasons you spoke of, it could well happen. And we'll stand ready to respond just like we would to any other enrollment spike.
Okay. And then one of my other questions was, so it looked like we were requiring masks for teachers in elementary, even if they are vaccinated.
Correct. In the case of adults, masks or while they're teaching, face shield.
Okay. Is that just because we don't want to have to ask the teachers if they've been vaccinated?
Right. We did give that a lot of thought, and we could either ask them, which I don't think would go over well at all. And any place that's asking for proof of vaccination is running into some problems. We could do it on the honor system. In the end, we landed on the notion that the vast majority of the inhabitants in a K-5 school don't have the option of being vaccinated or not.
Mm-hmm.
So until such time as they do, everybody in that school should just wear a mask for the reason of protecting others, whether or not you're vaccinated. And, asking adults to do what we're asking students to do, I think is a reasonable approach.
Okay. And then I don't know how they were working it last year with, during COVID, but in previous years for the elementary lunches, they always had overflow tables that the kids were not allowed to sit at for some reason. Are we looking at allowing the children to spread out during lunch and using all of the tables that are in the lunchrooms?
That's one where we spend a lot of time with principals. The answer is yes, to the greatest extent possible. This year we had to make it our business to guarantee 6 feet, and we were using every nook and cranny and library and things like this. So sort of to Ron's point earlier, we're going to go back to quote unquote normal, but then again, to the greatest extent possible. So yes, we'll use all the tables we can. We won't necessarily use the library anymore. And sort of compromise positions like that that we feel are the right common ground.
Okay. And then I guess my biggest question is, well, all right, so say there was an outbreak. We are covered. We have figured out how we would switch from 100% in person to either 100% virtual or the hybrid. We have that all figured out.
So, right, all figured out, sort of. What we are going to do is we're going to make sure all students and all teachers in grades K-12 continue to be ready to go to 100% virtual on a moment's notice. And that's because it could be in place of the 4th or 5th snow day. Again, we're going to have our snow days, 2 or 3 or so, but we do need that ability to be virtual So students will practice and teachers will practice, and we'll be ready for 100% virtual. I can't say that well, I can say that with regard to hybrid, there's so many different types of it, variations. So we'll be ready for something, but I don't know what yet. It'll probably depend on the grade level. Some districts aren't even, or are just representing they're not going to do any hybrid. It's either all in or all out. And I would like to think that given, if circumstances change to the point where districts need to consider or are being required to consider a hybrid, I'd like to think we can figure that out, but I don't want to go into 18 different iterations right now, planning for all of them when I can't quite tell what that will look like. I can guarantee
Okay.
we're ready for 100% virtual though, and we'll be ready for some form of hybrid.
Okay. And then I guess the question that the parents are probably sitting home asking that wasn't really addressed in depth is why wouldn't we be able to have classrooms of masked and unmasked? I know you said that you weren't going to look at that, but I'm sure that the parents at home, that's the question that they're thinking.
It's a good question. We gave it quite a bit of thought. The thing about that is, in a school with, say, 4 sections of it at a grade level, if we break it down that way, all of if that becomes the main driver of who's in which class, then first of all the other considerations have to be secondary. First thing is, okay, well, you want to be in the mask room or you want to be in the non-mask room? Then if only 7 want to be in the non-mask room, what do we do? We didn't survey that. And I suppose, to be honest, we probably could have, but I don't think that would have changed the answer, because that would have required many more classrooms also in schools that really don't have that many more classrooms to offer up. So we weren't opposed to the concept. It was more of a class assignment constraint, as well as a number of available rooms constraint. But the idea was not out of the realm of possibilities, just we felt this is better.
Okay. Paul, you had your hands up too?
I did. Yep, thanks, Joe. Jim, 2 quick questions. Can you just clarify for K through 5 and through grade 6, what it will be, what the requirement will be outside of the classroom? So in hallways, transitioning from classes, recess, and the cafeteria, whether those groups of students will wear masks or not, and also transportation. Will it be required on buses or not?
Okay. A couple good questions. And Paul, you're talking about K to 5, right?
I'm sorry, K through 5 and
Okay.
6, yes.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So K to 5, the masking situation indoors will be essentially like it was this past year. Required at all times. If you're having a snack or if your lunch, no, it's not required. It'll be different in that when you're outdoors, they're not required. And we were going to ask people to keep decent distance, but we're not going to get crazy about playgrounds and things. Everybody's got to go in knowing that indoors, the expectation is yes, the masks. Outdoors, no. You raised the point about busing, which is a really interesting one. Right now, I should say before Friday, our thought was, yes, they'll be required on K to 5 buses and not required on secondary buses, which, as you know, are combined. So basically 6 to 12 buses combined. However, it's come to light that it's quite possible that a federal requirement for buses on public transport, transit, applies to school buses. That isn't settled yet. Just today, I got something from our solicitor's office on how that may or may not play out. It's not clear whether we're going to have to require it on secondary buses or not. We are going to require it on K to 5 buses. But I'm glad you brought this up, because I should have added in the presentation, but it's so new, this development is so new. What happens on a bus 6 to 12 is right now not clear. right now, the reading is we're going to require it because everybody's forced to require it on buses, including school buses. But I don't know if that's going to be the way it's going to play out in the end. I know it's an unsatisfying answer, but believe me, the last 3 days have been somewhat unsatisfying on that front.
Okay, thank you. I understand.
Jim, Paul's question also was in regards to sixth grade specifically as well. I
Oh,
guess
thank
Paul's
you.
question the same about classrooms, hallways, cafeteria, so forth.
Thank you. Yes. So sixth grade is different. If it would have been easy, the answer would be easy if we went with that top survey question. Recall, like, what happens if we require masks of all middle school students? First of all, many fewer sixth grade students would choose virtual, and then it would be just easy. Okay, well, you're indoors, just like K-5, indoors wear a mask, outdoors you don't. We came down on the side of compromise and trying to find common ground, and 7th and 8th graders do have the option of being vaccinated if they want. 6th graders do not. So we had this dichotomy within the same school building. In our case, middle school is 6th, 7th, 8th grade. So that was a major challenge. And based on the survey results and based on what we thought we could pull off logistically, we figured that while students are amongst others who haven't had a chance to be vaccinated yet, in other words, amongst their 6th grade classmates, and then more precisely within the classroom, we would require the masks. Once we go outside the classroom, however, if we don't require masks of everyone in the building, then we've really kind of broken that seal of like a guaranteed mitigation, mask mitigation, because there are going to be 7th and 8th grade students walking around in the hallways at rival dismissal time without masks on. Tricky. Grade 6 is very tricky. I don't think anyone's going to be totally happy with this proposed solution. If we had went the other way and decided to require it of all middle school students because of the logistical difficulty that we're just finished talking about, I'm quite sure quite a few other people would not be happy with that solution. This is a perfect example of trying to find common ground and trying to meet people in the middle in some fashion as best we can.
So following up on that, so 6th grader, in class wear a mask, in the hall wear a mask, cafeteria obviously not, outdoors unmasked.
Correct.
And on the bus unknown.
Unknown, most likely mask, but correct, unknown. Hallways, just to clarify, hallways is a no, though, because hallways is where everybody else is as well. We don't want to create a situation where in one room or one place, some people are compelled, required to wear masks, and some aren't. We want it. I mean, could that happen? Yes. We would envision a whole lot of peer pressure or just sort of unnatural differences between students based on their age or their ability to be vaccinated, and we didn't want to create that.
So 6th graders don't have to wear a mask in the hall?
Correct.
Okay.
So Jim, don't we have a 6th grade hallway?
We do, and we gave thought to that, and it may well be the case that if you don't have to travel across there, sometimes they do. See, it's kind of tricky. Like, so we could say, well, while you're in the 6th grade hallway, you don't have to, but sometimes you have to go to gym, sometimes you have to go to world language. They have to go places besides the 6th grade hallway. So we did give thought to, the point of your question, which is a good one. We just didn't want to quantify that much, and frankly, we don't really know how we can enforce it. If we start, like, okay, this is a red hallway, masks for 6th graders only, a red hallway. Every now and then, an 8th grader comes down there for some reason. And again, in the spirit of kind of like trying to find some common ground, we just decided the hallways were too tricky to deal with.
Right. And then to finish up for 7th graders, in the hall for 7th and 8th graders, unmasked.
Masks are always optional for grades 7 to 12.
Okay.
Everywhere.
All right. Thank you then.
David, you've been waiting patiently.
Thanks. Yeah, Jim, I believe the CDC's latest recommendations for elementary school students, at least indoors, recommends that we still maintain spacing as much as possible.
Right.
Should we get to the point where the state or the county mandates that, can we accommodate 3 feet or more of spacing still?
Yes, to the greatest extent possible. How's that for a hedge? That is, Dave, your question is very well taken, and everyone is falling back on that just the same way we fell back on that this past school year. This past school year, first of all, the number was 6 for most of the year, and we fell back. We were able to accomplish that to the greatest extent possible. I mean, if someone took a slide rule or like a tape measure around, some desks might be 5.5 feet. So I didn't want to say at that time, guaranteed 6. We were much better at lunch than in classrooms. The CDC's recommendations of distancing will be followed here almost everywhere, in the sense that 3 feet is not that hard to meet. 6 feet is. If you can picture a classroom, like 3 feet is like basically like a yardstick away from desk. We've got that. We may not have that when they're lining up somewhere at lunch, because maybe there's not enough space for that. So our approach is we value distancing. We don't feel that it's a huge burden, but we want to go back a little closer to the normal than we were last year in terms of the distancing. And the CDC's recommendations do come with things like, well, if you can't accomplish X mitigation strategy fully, then a district needs to show how they're doing Y and Z, because the layering of mitigation strategies is what matters, not necessarily any one as a standalone. So for us to get back to normal as much as possible and get as many students in as possible, the distancing is the one that has to go to greatest extent possible, and the masking doesn't have to go to greatest extent possible. That one can stay where it is, because we can do that and accomplish our objectives.
All right, Marshall, I didn't call your name. Any questions for Jim?
Most of them were covered by what others already asked. It appears that from what you are suggesting to put in place, it is consistent with the CDC guidelines, correct?
Yes. With that caveat, with distancing, to David's question, to the greatest extent possible, we value distancing. We're going to try 3 feet. If somewhere is 2.5 feet, that's because we want to get as many kids back in and we want to get to as normal as possible. But generally speaking, yes, we agree, and we certainly would follow them on things that are doable, like cleaning and contact tracing, all that sort of thing.
Are there any guidelines that we have decided not to follow in lieu of the CDC guidelines? For instance, I did a little research. The CDC guidelines are consistent with the American Academy of Pediatric guidelines, but are there any that you looked at? Because obviously there are going to be differences of opinion. Yeah. Are there any that you looked at that felt we were not going to impose or not follow in lieu of these?
No, not really, with the possible exception of the busing question, because I really don't know where that's coming out. But so if I could put that one on hold for a few days, the answer to your question is no. We'll distancing the greatest extent possible, and all their other things are pretty much in line with our health and safety plan. And
the guidelines or the plan that you intend to implement, this is allowable and or consistent with every other governing body that we would have to follow?
Yes, because they're all either deferring to CDC or, my word, punting to CDC, or they're silent now. Whenever somebody, whether it's a county level or state level, comes up with a requirement, which they had many last year, as we all know, this year they appear to have almost none, then we'll certainly comply. And that's one of the things we have to state in that plan. To Amy's question earlier about what does ESSER require of districts, in your plan you have to state that you shall comply with directives should they come down the pike. from CDC or state or county level, and we will. And we will consider recommendations if something is new, and will comply with directives.
And finally, with regard to the plan you intend to implement, over much of the year, we received a lot of criticism from all sides. I mean, it was across the board. People were unhappy. Much of the criticism that I recall was that it appeared we were not intending or interested in getting in the kids back into school or getting in as many as we possibly could. We were also criticized for not doing, putting out a vote, doing a survey. Based on what we did in this particular instance, by putting out the survey, getting the results, it looks like it's 50 to 44 in favor of masks. Are we doing the best we can in order to get the most kids back into school to have as normal a school year as possible?
Well, the answer to that, Marshall, that's a very good question. The answer is we attempted to balance those two priorities of getting as many students in as possible with finding common ground. So actually, the answer to someone is no. Is like if we really wanted to maximize the number of students in grade 6, we would have all students in all of middle school wear masks, because then we'd only have 11 students out virtual. So in that case, we tried to match up that very high priority with another priority, which is to find common ground. And being that 7th and 8th grade students are old enough to be vaccinated, if their parents want them to be, then those grade levels we felt should have a different approach than grade 6. So it doesn't the problem is like we found last year, we're trying to solve equations with multiple variables at once. And if you maximize one, you have to take a little hit on another one. So as best we could, we try to find that perfect balance. It's not going to be perfect in many people's eyes. We know that. But like you said, that always brings back to last year and all of the notes and comments we got from all of the people who were not happy.
Jim, I'm probably going to throw something out there that's not going to make some people happy. You. So if 6th grade, because it is so weird and it's, such a mixture of 6th and 7th and 8th and who's in the hallway and who's not in the hallway and who's masked and who's not masked. And it looks like we're having about 22 kids in 6th grade that are saying that they would do virtual. Mm-hmm. Would we think about having 6th grade as a synchronous class? Because we're looking at 22 kids, 6th grade, a lot of it's the same. I don't know. Actually, just because they're just such a weird, they're kind of thrown in the mix of yes and no and who knows. And
6th grade is in the middle for sure. Transition year in every way. Actually, I should have pointed out in that list of things we consider different ideas, we did have out there as an option, teaching to both live and virtual students at the same time. And we definitely nixed it for all grades. We could theoretically do that, but remember those 22 are split amongst 3 teams or so. So that teacher, like the social study teacher will have 7 or so. And each team would have about 7, let's just say, if there are 3 teams. So, so that all of a sudden there's a not insignificant number on the screen. And I don't know that would make masking decision for parents any different necessarily, because they still have to choose whether or not they're going to go in school. I mean, it would make the virtual option for them better than the synchronous. But then we go back to again, sort of the common ground. All of the other 6th graders who are okay with going to school with mask on have a lesser experience in the classroom, because teaching to 2 things at once is
Well,
definitely-
no, I wasn't talking about teaching the two things. I was talking about having all of the 22 kids would be on the same team. So
They
Right,
would
so
have their own
think-
team.
So Jim,
you might have,
Jim, think about it in terms of what we did at K to 5,
Okay.
or the K to 5 students who went virtual. We had a virtual teacher fully dedicated to a class of virtual students.
Yeah.
So what Tracy's suggesting is an approach where that entire group of 6th grade, all virtual, just get their own, synchronous teacher
well,
virtually.
and it doesn't even have to be a different teacher, but if they're all on the same team and they would all be on the same class, they could go to the social studies teacher that's, how many,
Yeah.
there's like, how many classes on one team?
Well, theoretically,
4.
I see what you're saying, like that, so that social studies teacher could have a class of 22 on period 1, and it would be.
And they're all virtual.
We didn't
just-
think of that option, and that's not a bad thing for us to toss around. I don't know, Dr. Dewan, do you have any thoughts? I mean, we certainly can confer, tomorrow with middle school team. I don't want to say yes or no right now because I might not be thinking of a logistical hurdle, but it's an interesting something to toss around.
Yeah, I'd love to talk to the middle school team
Yeah.
to think through that a little bit more. The one thing that comes to mind is something you mentioned earlier about the K-5 group. If we were to consider something like this, is that transition, if and when students are able to get the vaccine and want to transition to in-person, then we might find ourselves with only 4 or 3 students remaining virtual. So in terms of staffing, something to think
They
about.
might have to, they would also, well, we can think about it. I don't want to
Yeah.
think out loud, but they might also have to be forced to have a different teacher in some fashion. Oh, we'll think about it. Interesting. Thank you for the idea, and we'll toss it around.
Thank you.
And Jim, if you and Yui could bring us an update on that prior to our vote or next week on the overall plan. Zeppi, I saw you had your hand up again. Before I come back to you, I want to ask our student board reps, Morgan and Sachi, if they had any questions or comments about the health and safety plan, masking and such for next year. Morgan?
Well, first, Joe.
Yeah.
How about if we welcome Sachi, because is this your first meeting?
Yeah, my first meeting.
Well, welcome aboard.
So I think my opinions, I like what you guys have said so far. And I think that the 6th grade idea about having the 22 kids is a good one. I don't know how practical it'll be because I know that there's a lot of, like, K through 5 has only one teacher, and then 6th grade is like transition so that they get multiple teachers, and all the kids might be maybe in like different math classes or like math levels. So that might be difficult, but it's definitely a good idea. And what you guys have said about the 7th through 12th grade, I also agree with that, because I think that a lot of people who want to be vaccinated have probably been vaccinated. So the optional masks, I think, is a good idea.
Thanks. Morgan?
I agree with like everything that you guys are saying. I think you guys all bring about valid points. I just had a couple questions maybe about like athletics. So you guys were saying how like you were trying to get back to normal and everything. I was just wondering, like, so masks are optional for athletics?
Yes.
Correct? Just to clarify.
Yeah.
And then what about for like fans, such as like indoor events and such? Have you guys talked about that yet at all?
Not really from fans. That's an interesting point, Morgan. I think the answer would be optional because interscholastic athletics and attending as a fan is an optional matter.
Okay.
Whereas, I mean, this is one of the guiding principles. Probably should put that in a slide. I should probably run my slides by you next time. I think that would be a very good idea. But anyway, one of the distinctions is what's required, like school day versus what's not, extracurricular things. So we are going to try to continue with some provision of virtual participation options for clubs and things, because we noticed that we got a huge spike in kids who are interested in doing things. That obviously doesn't count for impossible for interscholastic athletics, which are also voluntary. Like if you're not comfortable, then you take the year off of baseball or whatever. I know you wouldn't do that, but some would. And parents love to see their kids play. Maybe they don't take their younger child who isn't vaccinated yet. And so our whole feeling of like being responsible for kids who don't have the choice of being vaccinated yet could go away with spectators. So my prediction is it would just be optional. And maybe it's one of those things where we say, if you haven't been vaccinated, please, consider wearing a mask. I'm not sure, but it would definitely not require it, because if you go to an event and you're over 12 or over 11, you've had the choice of being vaccinated or not.
That sounds great. I just wanted to add that, like, I know a lot of students like play a lot of sports, different sports. I know every single student that I've talked to has like missed having the fans. They mean so much to us, and we just love having them. So I just want to just kind of emphasize how much like we appreciate the fans, such as events like our senior nights and our like silent night for basketball, like some of the biggest events of the year for student athletes. And I just wanted to say like how much we appreciate like having fans there.
Well, that's a really awesome point, and I think we can accommodate that, if not younger fans who, but again, that's their choice. So I think we'll be able to meet your point there and get some fans back in the stands more than we had this year.
Thank you.
Zephy, you had a follow-up question?
Yeah, I had a few questions actually. And I'm not sure if you covered this, Jim, and I'm sorry if you did and I missed it, but we delineated the survey to parents that had children under the age of 12 and those above. Is that why we did not go to the 7th through 12th grade?
That's correct.
Okay. So what are we going to do for 7th through 12th? Is that all going to be optional?
Yes.
Okay. And then for those who choose to wear masks, are we, for the 7th through 12th, are we, and even in the lower grades, if and when things change, are we thinking about, mask etiquette and considerations? For example, a comment like, if you're not vaccinated, please wear a mask, is probably not the most appropriate thing to say. I'm fully vaccinated, I wear my mask still. So I think we need to think about that and make sure that, whatever people are comfortable with is what they should be doing, and not putting pretense or thought around how they do things. So how about reporting of cases? Is that going to be something we're going to continue to do?
We are required to continue to do that with Montgomery County Office of Public Health. I don't know of any requirement to keep that 14-day rolling thing going again. I don't know of a requirement to send out emails like we did this year and delineate. It'll be a lot easier because we don't have to send those confusing emails that say, well, we have a case in middle school, but it was a virtual student versus, in person, or things like that. I'm not sure about the communicating out and to where, but I do know we have to keep track. And we'll do whatever Montgomery County has us do. Again, their involvement will be counting of cases and quarantine / contact tracing procedures. So we'll follow their lead.
Okay. So what's our plan, I guess, in the health and safety, thinking about if we need to quarantine a classroom, a building, how are we going to even have like the runway to know that things may be happening?
Yeah. Well, the need to quarantine a classroom or a building would come from Montgomery County Office of Public Health, like it did this past year. We had an incident or two of that. And that's why it's so important for all of our students and staff to be able to pivot on a moment's notice to 100% virtual. Because if that happens, that's different from the earlier question about, well, what happens if a student has to quarantine for 7 days or 14 days or something.
Correct.
Now the whole class does. So now we just treat it like a snow day for that class. And they have their teaching and learning done virtually.
Okay.
Or the whole building for that matter. So
okay.
You put your finger on one of the reasons why it's so important for us to keep current and skilled at the 100% virtual. for a number of reasons, one of which is what you just mentioned.
Okay. And then have we looked at our numbers to see how many of our rising sixth graders are actually going to be under the age of 11?
We, you mean, I think you mean under 12?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yes. I just pulled that out because I had a feeling someone was going to ask that. Currently 359 students in grade 5. Of those, only 7 of them will be 12 as of the end of August.
Oh.
So that will obviously be a sliding scale. And as January comes, they'll be able to, on their own, get a vaccine, whether or not it's approved for under 12. So we should be in pretty decent shape in grade 6, even if there is a delay in, the approval for people under 12, because just by virtue of time, many students will age into vaccine eligibility during the course of the year.
Right. Okay. Thank you. You answered the rest of my questions.
Any other questions or comments? Jim, I had several questions myself, but each of them was answered by one of the previous questions from my fellow board members. So if we don't have any other questions at this point, I just want to remind everyone that we will have another opportunity for more discussion on the health and safety plan as well as the teaching and learning plan next Monday before we actually vote on it. Tracy,
Yeah. So in what Zephy was just talking about, if we are not reporting out our little spreadsheet of how many cases there were, then the parents, and I'm not saying we have to do it constantly, but maybe we do it when if we start seeing cases reported. Like right now, if we don't have any cases, then we don't need to report it out. But I would think as a parent, if you're looking at it and you're saying, there's so many cases in this school, we might be looking at something coming in the next couple of days, or I want to be super vigilant with my child because, there's been cases in the school.
I can envision something if they're trickling in or maybe like a weekly update. Hey, for this week, like on Fridays, this week we had a total of this, and we don't have to distinguish it between virtual and in person. We just said at
Right.
Elementary at X. And we've shared them all with Montgomery County Office of Public Health and, that kind of thing.
Right.
If we get some spike for some reason, or if we go into some, there's a return of large case counts, we could return to daily.
I don't think daily would be needed, but I would think, weekly, and then at least if we are noticing, especially at one particular school, if we're noticing that there's a spike at that school, maybe then we send it out a little bit more often, like, hey, just letting you know that this school is inching towards yellow, or,
I like that idea. I think if we can get rid of that 14-day rolling thing, which no one really understood outside of Katie Meyer and a handful of people at Montgomery County Office of Public Health, this would make this process way easier and also, I think, more useful in the sense that we either twice a week or something share out. So I like
and the parents will feel informed.
Yeah, I like it.
Okay, so at this point, I'm going to move us to the first public comment period of the evening, where we'll hear comments on agenda items only. And because I anticipate that the health and safety plan is going to be a hot topic, I'm going to relax our maximum of 5 speakers on the same topic for this evening. But I also don't want us to go for an unlimited time frame on public comments. So I will relax the 5 max on one topic, but I want to cap the public comment period at no more than 30 minutes. And by my clock, it's 8:19. So at 8:49, if we still have people who want to speak, we're going to cut off the first public comment period. If there are no speakers before then, we'll move on with the agenda. but I see several hands raised or did earlier, and I want to give folks an opportunity to express their thoughts to the board. So let's see. The same rules apply as normal, that if you want to make a comment, use the raise hand feature in Zoom, and we'll take comments in the order that hands are raised. And when your name is called, please unmute, state your name, your municipality residence, and the agenda topic for which you want to comment. And you will have up to 3 minutes to speak, after which your mic may be muted. And as always, it's the board's practice not to engage in back and forth dialogue with speakers. And with that, I'm going to take a look at the queue. And our first speaker is PB. So you can unmute and please begin.
Hi, Bladak.
Excuse me, your name?
Paula Bladak from Bluebell.
Okay.
I'm going to be discussing COVID. In the last decade or more, public schools, which are government agencies, are being more burdened than ever to just teaching the basic academics of ABCs and 1, 2, 3. And this is why the United States is number 21 globally. Schools now address a student's education, emotion, health, physical needs, food and clothing, discipline, as well as their home environment. These days, more and more is being removed intentionally and unintentionally from the parents' hands and placed in the public school hands, which is a government agency. These past 18 months, the school, staff, and administration have become scientists, doctors, and politicians. Politics have seeped into the school and the classroom with mask recommendations, vaccination questions by the staff to the students during class. Not in a history class, teachers are asking about political party. In math, discussing political events, quoting the president in an email, and culturally responsive teaching, also known as critical race theory. How could a student feel safe and protected by their school or staff with these conversations that create divisiveness? An educator's job is to teach. George Washington was the first president of the US, along with he was a slave owner. Not asking a student in the elementary grade who should get the job, a white person or a Black person. From birth, a parent's job is to teach respect, proper behavioral morals, ethics to their children. Even those without a parent have values, good, bad, or indifferent. This should not be a teacher's job. Everything starts at the home, and the parents are the only experts of their child. I'd like to remind everyone that COVID-19 is not approved by the FDA, as it is an emergency use authorization. Masks, they only protect those who are sick from those who are healthy. Masking healthy people is ineffective. Wissahickon needs to be a leader by offering mask choice, no COVID testing to the students, not requiring student vaccine, teaching only history without personal opinions, and not being political. The Wissahickon School District is number 12 in the state, and let's get better than that. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Kristen.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. My question is just pertaining to.
Can you please state your name and your municipality residence and
This
topic?
is Kristen. This is Kristen Stanton, and I'm in Whitpeen. I am talking about the school safety plan, in particular the grades K through 5 plan. So it is my understanding that from grades K through 5 that we are going to be requiring masks indoors. This is based on the fact that these children cannot currently receive vaccines. This is not taking into account parent consideration. This is not taking into account parents' need and desire for their children to be unmasked. Instead, all this is doing is bringing in political propaganda in order to continue to mask our children. And in my eyes, at this point, when we know that they transmit it so little, they're so luckily they're taken away. Luckily, they do not have the ability to get as sick as adults do. They are blessedly really not that affected by this. And in the end, we are going to continue to mask them. We're going to continue to keep them liable and hold them culpable while the adults are fear-stricken and making them stay masked forever. Because really, you're saying January. January is in the middle of respiratory season. And I don't know if I'm talking to a group of people that understand that this is seasonal or not, but it's probably going to be pretty high transmission-wise. Right now, Montgomery County does not have high case counts and transmission. The CDC guidance was nuanced. It allowed us to be able to decide whether or not these children should be masked on a bunch of other different reasons, but among them was community spread. Right now, that's not there. These children should not be masked in the fall. If we have to mask them in January, then so be it. I don't agree with it, but I can understand why you would feel like you need to do something like that. As of right now, this is not a viable option. 50% said that they did not want masks. They wanted it to be optional. 50% said they wanted it to be required. Optional is honestly the only option. Why does somebody who wants them required get to tell me what I do with my child? Why are any of you telling me what I get to do with my child? These are unproven medical interventions that you are forcing on us to use on our children. It is not necessary right now. If you need to do it at a later date, please do so then. This is the only school in the district that is doing this as of right now. This is not appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Donna Lynch.
Hello.
Hello, you can begin.
Hi, I wanted to just take a second to thank.
Can you please state your name and municipality or topic?
I apologize. My name is Donna Lynch. I live in Whitpain Township, and the topic is the health and safety plan. I just want to take a second to thank Dr. Crisfield, all the administrators, the staff, and the teachers who did an amazing job in an unbelievably difficult year. I just have two brief comments that are more information seeking that I would like to hear more about at the secondary K to 12 level of the health and safety plan regarding lunches at the high school and the ability to distance to the greatest extent possible in the cafeterias when they would not be wearing masks and eating. And I know we've heard in the health and safety plan about athletics, but I'm also curious about the safety plan for drama and music and singing, especially at the high school level. That's my comment. Again, I just wanted to say thank you for everyone's very hard work over the last year.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Deanne Morris.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Good evening. My name is Deanne Morris. I live in Ambler Borough, and I'm going to be speaking also on the health and safety plan. I have 2 children at LGE, and tonight I'm speaking as a parent and a pharmacist. I know there are many feelings regarding masks in school, but I'm asking that Wissahickon would simply follow the CDC guidelines. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention guidelines are evidence-based and include expert judgment with consideration of risk versus benefit. Just a few days ago, as Dr. Crisfield said, they have released updated guidelines, and I'm in agreement with the points. First, they state that masks should be worn indoors by all individuals who are not fully vaccinated, and this means universal masking for anyone under 12. Second, they recommend at least 3 feet of distance when possible. And third, they recommend layering multiple prevention strategies, which include screening, testing, hand washing, staying home when sick, and of particular consideration, ventilation. Last week, there was a study released by the CDC about the efficacy of HEPA filters combined with masking in rooms. Portable HEPA air cleaners offer a simple means to increase filtration of aerosol particles in a room. The data showed considerable reduction in risk of transmission, and I really hope that Wissahickon will consider putting HEPA filters in all classrooms. I believe this will help with other disease transmission and also children that suffer from asthma. After the past year, our priority should be getting as many kids as we can back in school. We should ensure this is safe, limiting unnecessary illness and viral spread, and minimizing the potential for disrupted in-person learning. we can best try to accomplish this by following the guidelines. I think what it all comes down to is what is best for our children, and that's getting them back in school. Following the expert guidance is our best shot at doing that safely. Thank you so much, everyone, for everything you've done. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Kara Finn.
Hi, there we go. My name is Kara Finn. I'm a resident of Lower Gwinnett Township, and I'm commenting on the health and safety plan. This fall, I will have 2 children at LGE. I want to thank the administration for focusing on following the best public health guidance our nation has to offer, as well as on the mental and emotional health of our children by formulating a plan that gets as many children safely into the classroom as possible. I want to thank you for scrambling to incorporate the latest CDC recommendations that came out just a few days ago into the plan. Thank you for putting our children's well-being first. I do have 2 questions to consider answering at some point before the vote. I want to ask about the notification of exposure to a positive case in the classroom. I hope that the entire classroom will be notified of an exposure, as there will be less distancing because it just won't be possible. And I imagine more movement, especially in the elementary school, between kids moving around, perhaps for circle time and the like. I also want to echo Deanne's comment, asking about the possibility of portable HEPA filters in the classrooms. Is this being considered? If not, could it be? And just want to say I strongly support the plan put forth by the administration, and I want to urge the board to vote in favor of it next week. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jamie Erfel.
Hi, this
Hi.
is Jamie. Jamie Erfel. I'm from Whitpain Township, and I want to speak on the health and safety plan for next year. And I just wanted to highlight a couple of things that were already said. One, I think Marshall first brought it up about maximizing the students in school for next year. And I think that's all of our goals, is to get as many students in the school that want to be there and whose parents want them to be there as possible. And then what Dr. Crisfield said about how he kept emphasizing common ground. And I think that's important because we're on such extremes of this. You know, there's a lot of us that really want our parenting rights back, and we want to be the authority on what our kids do. There's also some of us, like me, for example, where my kids are experiencing side effects from the mask. A lot of times they come home and they have headaches or they're dizzy, especially more on the hot days. So it's important that they're not wearing them outside. And I'm glad that you adjusted that for this year. But I do worry about them in gym class specifically. You know, the masks were never designed for people that were exercising. They were never really studied or tested on children. We don't have any studies at the moment that I'm aware of, unless anybody else knows of any, that actually studied children's safety and efficacy for wearing masks. In the latest JAMA study, where it was peer reviewed, it showed that our smallest children were the most affected by the increased CO2 levels in their masks. And while it was still below the OSHA recommendations, you have to keep in mind those are made for adults. And we don't really have any guidelines around kids. It's kind of like one giant experiment. I also understand, talking to some other moms, you know, their kids have autoimmune diseases or other things that they're concerned about. And I think as parents and members of the community, we also have to see their concerns. So my questions for everyone are, if we have this 50-50 split, are there other solutions that we can incorporate? Like for the elementary kids, can we separate classrooms? Can we have like classrooms where the parents don't want the masks and classrooms where the parents masks their kids? And at first I thought that might be like segregation, but then I was thinking that we have the peanut table at lunch. So it's not like none of that's being done in the school already. Also, can we have more mask breaks? I think that kids are hesitant at a young age in elementary school to ask for that. Can we have more mask changing? Can we have to keep up the increased hand washing, keep up the great efforts by everybody of not sending their kids to school sick? I think we all did a fabulous job of that, and the nurses would call. And I think like that made a huge difference. The HEPA filters that Kara mentioned are a great idea. Can we do more outdoor time? Vitamin D has been shown to lower COVID in general. So I think there's a lot that we can still consider and do to maximize students in the classroom and find that common ground that Dr. Crisfeld's talking about. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Lori Green.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, my name is Laurie Green and I live in Whippane Township. I'm also speaking on the health and safety plan. As parents, we want the choice whether or not we send our children wearing masks to school. There are two specific studies that I'm going to reference that show that there is no overwhelming data to support mask mandates or that masks are effective against the spread of COVID-19. On June 3rd of this year, the Montgomery County Office of Public Health had a presentation on masks at their public board meeting entitled Unmasking the Confusion. During this meeting, Dr. Richard Lorraine, the medical director for the Montgomery County Department of Health, gave this presentation on what studies have shown to date on masks. He reported that studies have shown that cloth and surgical masks have done very little to prevent community spread over the last year. He said, quote, "The use of cloth and surgical masks, although it varies from study to study, but ranged from 0 to 15% in effectiveness. The highest I'm able to find is 15%. There are a number of studies out there that don't show a whole lot of improvement by using masks." The second study I'm going to reference is published by the COVID-19 School Response Dashboard and Brown University. They reported on the correlation of mitigation practices with staff and student COVID case rates in Florida, Massachusetts, and New York. This study concluded that there was no correlation between mask policies and how many cases of COVID that the school had, whether it was student or staff cases. In our neighboring Bucks County, there were schools the past year that never had mask mandates the entire school year. These schools were Faith Christian Academy, Regina Academy at St. John the Baptist, Traverse Day School, Calvary Baptist School, and many daycares. The case counts at these schools were identical to those of the public schools that had mask mandates for the school year. Currently, Lower Merion School District, Souderton, and Upper Perkiomen School Districts in Montgomery County, they currently have optional masks. Finally, we reference the CDC recommendation for masks. That is just that, a recommendation. I want to remind everyone that last year, it was not recommended for schools to go back in person 5 days a week, and we did it anyway. So we do not have to follow the recommendations. We can follow our own. In conclusion, I please ask the board to vote no to the proposed health and safety plan for the upcoming 2021-2020 school year. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. We have time for one more speaker, and that is Colleen Semprola.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm addressing something different. I don't know if this is appropriate right now. I'd like to address curriculum.
Sure.
Okay, Colleen Semprola, I'm in Ambler Borough. This is currently a national narrative. There's currently a national narrative that you don't support all of the racial sensitivity and equity training in schools, then you are against teaching history. This narrative has filtered down to our school district. I have been assured that racial equity training in our district is being done to encourage discourse, increase sensitivity and understanding, and to promote unity. I am going to read one excerpt from training that was done this past February at Wissahickon High School. Today, we want to talk about reverse racism and close out our series with an understanding of what it means to be anti-racist. Merriam Dictionary defines reverse racism as prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism directed against a person or people on the basis of their membership in a dominant or privileged racial or ethnic group. The presentation then goes on to say, before we go any further, we must emphasize that reverse racism is a myth. Here's why. First, to clarify what reverse racism means. One must understand that it implies that a class of people from the dominant racial group have been negatively impacted or discriminated against in favor of a racial or ethnic minority group. It's an idea that a racial or ethnic minority group can somehow cause a negative outcome for the majority group through political, economic, and institutional means. For reverse racism to exist, another group has to be able to enforce its power and privilege over another race We have already learned that due to historical racism and structural racism in particular, racial and ethnic minorities do not have power nor privilege. Therefore, it is impossible for there to be reverse racism. The idea of reverse racism represents a false ideology that is used to diminish the painful reality of the African American experience. When you are or appear suggest the existence or claim to be a victim of reverse racism, you support a very degrading and hurtful narrative. Now, you all may agree with that excerpt, but that's not the point. That excerpt presented one side of an issue as factual and all but forbid any dialogue. Is that encouraging understanding and discourse? It does not sound like it to me. It is pitting student against student because they may hold or be willing to see different viewpoints. It is divisive. I found many different resources which frame both sides of the reverse racism issue, including pieces from the Economist, the Wall Street Journal, and other reputable sources. There was a legitimate discussion to be had on this topic, but instead, one viewpoint was presented as fact and any discourse was shut down, with anyone not in agreement being told they were being degrading and hurtful. This is not history, and it is legitimate to express concerns about this. This is not promoting understanding and unity. This is just a small portion I am using as an example. I did email my concerns to both administration and the board. I did have a discourse with the principal and Dr. Crisfield, but it was eventually made clear to me that this training was going to continue for both educators and students. I have no confidence that it will be handled in a way that will encourage conversation and understanding. I did not hear back from any board members. It's easier to dismiss me and other parents like me as conspiracy theorists who don't want to teach history. Nothing could be further from the truth. I want our students to have a well-rounded education and to be able to engage in meaningful debate. Teaching American history to our young people is critically important. Hearing opposing viewpoints is beneficial and educational for all involved. Shutting down students with opposing viewpoints and instilling guilt for their viewpoints is unacceptable and harmful for all involved.
Thank you for your comments. So that closes out the first public comment period. For those who didn't get an opportunity to speak, we do have a second public comment period at the back end of our agenda. But with that, I'm going to move on now to the board president's report. I have one informational item this evening, and it is regarding a new public meeting format, which will become effective at our August 23rd, 2021 meeting. And at that meeting, we are going to have, I guess you could call it kind of a hybrid meeting going forward. The board will meet in person in the board meeting room as we used to, seated around the board meeting table. But we will allow the community to attend the meeting in person, obviously, but also allow attendance virtually. And with the new changes that we're putting in place and some of the technology upgrades we're making, we'll be able to stream the public meetings via YouTube and broadcast them on the district's cable channel. The community will be able to make public comments in person as we always did in the past, but we'll also retain the ability to have people make public comments via Zoom. I think the logistics of it, we're still trying to nail down, but we expect to have that fully functional and in place for our August meeting. So stay tuned for that. I personally am looking forward to gathering with my fellow board members in person, but I'm also happy that we're going to retain the ability for a broader public audience to participate virtually and even make public comment virtually. Questions about the switch in format for the August meeting? No, okay. So then I just also wanted to mention one action item that we're going to be voting on next week, and it is for the approval of a resolution, which is an emergency declaration pursuant to section 520.1 of the Pennsylvania School Code. Essentially what this is a document which in essence gives us as a district the ability to count virtual instruction days as school days. So we had this in place last year with the pandemic, and that allowed us to, in essence, not take a snow day because we could have virtual instruction and still have it count as an instructional day. This is just re-upping that ability for us to do that for the coming school year. Any questions about that? Oh, Zeppi?
So for the younger grades that don't have computers like of their own, K through 5, will we, I don't understand how we would be able to do that for K through 5, or will there be, is it like when we have notice and we'll give them laptops the day before? I just don't understand how we could make that happen.
Yeah, Jim or Miguel?
Sure. The answer is that we do have portable bags and a device, sometimes a Chromebook for each student. But you're right, if we have no forewarning and we can't get them home the night before, that day or however many days will be dicey. So I think moving forward, we'll know that sending the devices home as a precautionary matter might mean they just come back the next day because we don't have a snow day. But we do have a device for each student, and we will continue to do so.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, so then we'll move on to the superintendent report. Jim?
Okay, thank you. My one informational item is just a highlight of Act 66, which was recently passed in the state of Pennsylvania. And it provides for the ability for families to request their child be retained for a year related to effects of the pandemic. So we, of course, shared that out with all of our families because it's something that you may not have naturally come across in your media travels or social media discussion groups, what have you. All of our families are aware of this. And the thing is, the state's deadline is really tight. It's imposed as July 15th, and we cannot extend that. So we did advertise it, or we did share it out. We did translate it, and we stand ready to honor any of the requests that come in. And I can share out perhaps next week, numbers. I wouldn't, of course, share names, but I don't know that it'll be a very large impact here in the Wissahickons. It might well be a huge impact in different districts.
Jim, do you know, have we had any yet?
We've had a handful. Do you know if we have like maybe 3 or something at this point?
Yes.
Something like that.
Okay.
One more question. How did we disseminate that information? I saw it through email and other, digital platforms.
Correct. We did not do it a hard copy. We pretty much refrained from that, except for in circumstances where we know there's a trouble with access to technology. But on the other hand, this year we kind of created tech access for everybody. So we hope that we got everybody, and school buildings are aware of families who typically don't respond to digital information, and we reach out to them otherwise.
Right. This timing is really tight.
Really is.
So just hoping that everybody who might want to be aware of this option is.
Yep, great. Okay. And then the action items are all for review only tonight. We have the previously presented health and safety plan and the teaching and learning plan. Again, those two documents are going to be, I'm going to get all of that recent communication. I may leave the busing part blank, I'm not sure, but we'll get all those out and post it on our website so people can look at the details. We spoke at length about all of the plans in either case, but the documents will be there probably tomorrow morning. And then very exciting, we have for next meeting, appointment of both our new Director of Equity and Cultural Responsiveness, as well as the incoming principal of Bluebell Elementary School. And information will be shared out with all of the community on both of those shortly. It's all pending, of course, board approval at the next meeting, but the board has met both candidates, and the interview process is over. The reference checking is over, and I cannot be more excited to have both of these people on the team. starting as soon as they're able to get here. And that's my report.
Great. Any comments?
Jim, one
questions?
quick follow-up question. In the event, sorry, one question, Joe.
Sure.
In the event we didn't address a question or provide information that a parent may have about the new plan, what's the best course of action for that particular person? Should they reach out to the building principal? Like, how should that outreach happen?
What I think we ought to do is, we took some notes of questions tonight, and we'll do those in the usual way on the website, board Q&A. People can certainly reach out to principal. I think the questions are going to come more when it's about, okay, I've got to choose between virtual or not. What does that look like at Stony Creek Elementary School or, Wissahickon Middle School? Those questions would definitely go to the principal before July 30th.
Okay, we're going to move on to the assistant superintendent report. Wenyewe?
Thank you. No items at this time.
All right, then board solicitor report. Kyle?
I also have no items, but thank you.
All right. Board secretary report. Wade?
Yeah, thank you. No informational items, and at the next meeting, we will request approval of the May 24th work session, the June 1st public board meeting, and the June 2nd board racial equity committee.
All right, any questions for Wade? Can you continue with the board treasurer report, please?
Thank you. There will be no items at the meeting.
All right, and then we're going to move on to the Director of Human Resources report, and this is our first one from our new HR director, Danielle Hay. Danielle.
Good morning, good afternoon, thank you. So right now there are no informational items. We do have some action items that we'll be reviewing next meeting. 12.1, which will be retirements, resignations, and terminations. 12.2 and 12.3, which is extended school year professional and support staff. We will have 12.4, which is approval of volunteer list. 12.5, the substitute listing. 12.6 will be an extended contract with Explorations for consulting services for the agreement with the principal. This is an extension of a previous agreement. And then finally 12.7, which is the approval of the release and settlement agreement reviewed earlier in executive session tonight.
Danielle, item 12B6, that is the contract for Gary Avamont to serve as interim principal at Bluebell. Is that correct?
Correct. It's an extension of that time.
Okay. Other questions for Danielle? All right. So we're going to move on then to the Communications Committee report. Zephy?
Hi. First time in a long time we're not showing numbers, but I do have an informational update. On June 15th, we had a working session with the Communications Committee team that I chair, along with Ronnie and Ron. The topic was later start times. This has been a topic that has been brought up quite a bit in the past couple of years. In fact, right before COVID, it was a topic that we were about to embark, and then COVID happened. We all, as school board members, agreed that this is something we want to take a deeper dive and a better understanding of what that is and what that impact may have. We have asked the administration to start a plan targeting school year 2023-2024, so for fall of 2023. So we're looking for us to have the administration start a plan of what the impact is, what their recommendation is, and what we will be considering as a board. This is something that we will be incorporating into the superintendent's goals to capture this 2-year goal. And there will be probably a few more communication meetings coming up in the next year and a half to have more discussions on this. Any questions? I have no other items.
All right, thanks, Effie. The Curriculum Technology Committee report, Ronnie?
I have no items. Dr. Devon, do you have anything to report?
Thank you. We have no informational items. There's one action item we'll seek approval for at the next meeting. It's approval for the cost. There's been an increase in the tuition costs for the Montgomery County Community College Gateway to College partnership that we have. The board previously approved the expenditure of to $36,000 for this. We're requesting that increase not to exceed 40. Excuse me, did I say 36,000? Yes, for that not to exceed $40,200. That is a typo here.
Is that a typo?
That is a typo. It looks like it should be $40,200. We will correct that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any questions for Winue? All right, we're going to move on then to the Facilities Transportation Committee report. Tracy?
Thank you, Joe. We do have 2 informational items, and then we have some action items. Wade, do you want to go over what we have going on?
Yeah. Amy, you jump. Do you want to jump in, or do you want me to walk this one through?
You can walk it through if you don't mind. Thank you.
Okay. So Mrs. Ginsburg forwarded to me information regarding a request to support legislation to provide $30 billion worth of federal funding for electric school buses. At the previous facilities meeting, we had a discussion about solar panels, and then we also fielded a couple questions about buses. And then very shortly thereafter, there was this request for supporting additional funding for electric school buses, and Mrs. Ginsburg wanted us to just have a quick discussion about it. The background information is, not surprisingly, that most school buses are diesel buses, and there is the emission of, in this article, it says $5.3 million, 5.3 million tons of greenhouse gases, and that they are hopeful that conversion to electric school buses would decrease that amount and be more clean for the environment. So that is it. I can forward the individual information to all the board members. If the board decided to make an overall resolution, it doesn't seem like there's a place where the entire board would have the ability to say, hey, all 9 of us said yes. It looks like individually you would have to do so. But that's what this discussion request was for. Amy, did you want to add anything else?
Just by way of background, I had just asked at the Transportation Committee meeting about the possibility of looking into electric buses for our next contract. And we talked about, that it might be cost prohibitive, but that we could look into grant opportunities to get funding to assist in doing that transition to electric buses. And then this came along about possible funding that we could support. So I just thought it'd be a great opportunity for us to try to do something to get funding down the road for us to hopefully, or other districts, to move towards getting electric buses. So that was my reasons for bringing it up.
So Wade, is there a letter? It looks like, we're discussing signing a letter to Congress. So is there already a letter out there? Or are we talking about composing a letter?
Yeah, thank you, Tracy. So it isn't a letter so much as it's a form. You fill it out as an individual board member and you push send and you send it to them, and that registers the fact that you believe that this would be a good thing to do. So the board could vote as a whole and support it, but I think individually the board members would represent what their position would be.
Okay, so you're going to send that out to each individual board member?
Yep.
Okay. All right, and then it looks like we have some action items for next week.
Oh, Tracy, before you get to that,
Oh,
do you want to
yeah.
give a recap of the facilities meeting that we had on the 9th?
Well, Wade did cover some of it just now. We also were talking about looking at some turf options at the high school. And I believe that's going to be one of our action items. Having Dewey give us some, the numbers that we had run previously were from a couple of years ago. Also, I believe that we were talking about the middle school conversion from the pool area. Those two things were kind of sidelined when everything happened with COVID. So the numbers that we received for those before on how much it would cost to do any kind of renovation or to do the turf field are a little outdated. So I believe we're asking for approval to have the engineers run new numbers for us to find out, if it's something that we want to push forward and move on. I think that was it. I know we have the one other approval for a security system. But I don't remember. Was there anything else to be covered at that meeting?
Yeah, so you hit the items. Other than we also talked about just the overall money and how much money we have. We have about $14.9 million in capital projects. As we spend the money down over the next 5 years, it goes to about $6 million under the current plan. And that sort of set the context for the discussions that you talked about. And the other one was the update of the first student proposal, which we'll also be requesting for approval at the next meeting.
Okay, and I think that's it.
All right, any questions for Tracy or Wade? All right, we're going to move then to the Finance Committee report. David?
Thanks, Joe. Finance Committee report doesn't have any informational items. We have 3 action items that we'll be considering next week. First is an approval to waive a stadium usage fee in the event that Lower Gwinnett Township would move their Pike Fest to the school and off of the Sunday Town Pike, either September 26th or October 17th. Second is to consider approval of waiver of school library property tax penalty for a property in Bluebell. And the third is approval of the first student contract that Wade just mentioned. And I think that's all. Wade, would you elaborate if necessary?
I think you hit it. The one correction that I would just like to provide is the township is, I have put it down as Pike Fest, but they are now calling it the Fall Festival to try to differentiate it from the Pike Fest. And other than that, the first student contract is a reduction of $50,000 from the last time that we talked about it. And years 4 and 5, the increase would be reduced to 2% from 2.5%. The one reduction for the 50,000 is already provided for, and the 2% will be a change to the next meeting. So that's the only update.
Marshall, you have a question? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Paul. You had a question, and then Marshall. I think.
Just wondering if first student has the ability to provide the electric transportation that you're discussing.
I'm sure they would provide any vehicles that we requested. The current pricing is listed with vehicles much like they are right now, as we set forward in the proposal that went out a few years ago. If we changed as a board to requesting electric vehicles, we would have to get an update proposal from them as to what the cost change would be per vehicle. I can certainly do that. In any change, it would be a negotiated change that I'd bring back to the board and say, this is a change, this is what's requested, and go from there.
Thanks, Wade.
Marshall, did you have a question or comment?
No, just getting ready.
Oh, okay. I had a question, like maybe a comment regarding 16B2. It's for waiving tax penalty. This is for a property owner of I think a large property in Whitpain. And we had received some information from the property owner requesting us waiving the tax penalty, which we generally do not waive penalties on late payments for taxes. But based on the description of this individual situation, it seemed, I guess on the surface, that there was a good faith effort made to pay the taxes on time. And due to possibly some COVID-related delays at the post office, it was what led to the delay in payment beyond the payment window. But I guess in some follow-up conversation I had with Wade, those facts might not be 100% accurate. But at any rate, Wade, did you get any further clarification on this tax waiver request?
I did, and I don't have anything that I would say is completely conclusive. I'll forward what I received from the two entities, one being the taxpayer, one being the tax collector. I don't think I or you are ever going to know exactly what happened, and that's where I am, at least.
And Joe, I guess it's worth mentioning as well that the township has agreed to waive their portion of this penalty as well.
That is true.
Yeah. So so just by way of information for the other board members, a similar tax waiver request was sent to Whitpain Township, which they approved for this property owner. I don't know the circumstances of that approval, but that's something to, I guess, take into consideration as we consider this request. Any other questions? Okay, so then we're moving on to the policy committee report. Marshall?
Thank you, Joe. I am happy to report. I have nothing to report.
All right. The Racial Equity Oversight Committee report. Paul?
There's no report for this evening, no updates.
Paul, we had a meeting on June 2nd. Do you want to provide a brief recap of that meeting from last month?
Sure. So the last meeting we actually had a presentation from guests in the form of PCCY. Joe, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear it. Yeah, it was from PCCY. Yep.
I'm sorry. We had a guest presentation in the form of PCCY, who came in to speak about their recent report on school districts in the suburbs in terms of diversity and inclusion, as well as gaps within the education system. We had great attendance. We had a fantastic report and discussion around the topic, as well as the ability to have some ongoing communication and discussion moving forward on the topic to hopefully address issues, get the most current up-to-date thinking on the topic, and hopefully be able to implement some of that thinking into action items moving forward for our district. It was a very productive meeting. I get a lot of good discussion, and I think I started a good relationship with this group that does a lot of formal and in-depth research throughout the Commonwealth and also within the region. And so very, very happy with the outcome of that meeting and looking forward to ongoing communications and discussions.
And Paul, I also recall that Jim and Winieri presented the group with some information about our gifted programs in Wissahickon, and in particular, the lack of Black and Brown representation in the gifted population, and talked about some possible root causes, why that may be, and some actions that we're going to take to try to improve that representation going forward. I think that, to me, the most significant one was the implementation in this coming school year of universal screening for giftedness of all students, I guess maybe in second grade, if I remember that correctly. Is that right, Linda?
In the spring of first grade.
Okay, great. All right, thanks.
Absolutely, and that will be a fantastic initiative that I think will help to address the issue of the lack of inclusion within the program. And also, I think there will be a direct tie-in with the director of equity position that will be coming on board within the district that can help to look at some of those issues and address the root causes of those, but by determining really what the problems are, where the disconnects exist within the district, and again, a plan to move forward. So the combination of those efforts, I think, will be tremendous and really help to move our district forward.
Great.
Can I ask one question? If we are doing that in the spring of first grade, how do we handle it for the students that transfer in to Wissahickon after first grade?
We do have that tool available. So that's something that buildings can track and monitor and can work with our Department of Student Services to ensure that we are catching students in that way.
So was there any discussion about, those kids that are past first grade at this point? Like, this is great moving forward. And I love that we're thinking about this and actually thinking about the earlier grades. That's fantastic. But there's a cohort, a significant one of students that are outside first grade. So would we think about, and maybe we're not there yet, but how do we kind of do a little bit of catch up too for that?
One of the things that we talked about is, it's a great question and a really, really good point. So at this time, we don't have a plan to, for example, screen every student in grades 2 and beyond. However, the other aspects of this conversation included the importance of providing professional learning for our staff to be cognizant of what diverse gifted learners looks like in the classroom. We talked about making sure that we are having meaningful engagement with families to inform them of the process, to inform them of the ways in which they can make requests as a part of that process, so that in this way, we're hopeful that these other elements will help to identify students who might be in need of that evaluation, who are after first grade. And that's something that will help those students in the younger grades as well, families in the younger grades as well. But that's a really good point. And it's something that we are continuing to have conversations about as an administrative team, to give some thought to how do we impact the group of students who have gone beyond that grade level.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to move on to the report of board representatives. The extracurricular committee, Tracy.
Sorry, nothing at this time.
And the MCIU Board of Directors, Amy's name is listed there, but it's actually the last meeting was my last meeting at the MCIU as our representative on their board. And the primary update is that my term ended and Amy's term started July 1st. So going forward, she'll be attending the meetings and providing a report out on what's happening with the MCIU. The MCIU Legislative Committee, Ron?
Yeah, there was not too much movement in the state legislature beyond Wolf's request to increase funding throughout the state, including support for pre-K. Though, interestingly enough, I've received a very large email from the sponsor of that group that just this afternoon I haven't had a chance to even open it up, but I'm sure there'll be something interesting, and if there is, I will forward that to the entire board.
Okay. The North Monco Technical Career Center. Ronnie or David?
Well, they were going over their security and safety assessment at their last meeting. They're meeting virtually as well. And I don't think too much is happening there either.
Okay. PSBA liaison, Duffy?
Nothing to report, and they're actually taking a break for the summer.
All right.
Joe, can I
With
ask
that-
a question?
Yeah, sure.
So Ronnie or David, has North Monco said what they're going to do moving forward for masking or not masking?
I don't think they've made any decisions. David, do you know anything else?
I don't remember the details about their masking plan either. They're coming back, I guess, full time in the fall. They're going to still try to maintain distancing as I recall. I could be wrong, but I think they're going to make masking optional. But
okay,
Jim may have some word on
I think
that.
that's right, David. I think the key there is their kids are older, grades 9,
Right.
12. I'm not sure it's official yet, but they're definitely leaning towards optional.
okay, thank you.
All right, well, that takes us to our second public comment period, where we'll hear comments on any school-related topic. Anyone wishing to make a comment, use the raise hand feature in Zoom. And again, we'll take comments in the order that hands are raised. When your name is called, please unmute, state your name, municipality of residence, and your topic. And we'll take a maximum of 5 speakers on the same topic. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes, after which your mic may be muted. And again, it's the board's practice not to engage in back and forth dialogue with speakers. So let me check the list, and I see a few hands raised. Our first speaker is Jen D.
Hello.
Hello.
This is Jen Dovin from Whitpain Township. I just have a couple things that I would really like to be considered. One, I know that the teachers cannot be asked directly because of HIPAA if they've been vaccinated. I do know that there are numerous amounts of teachers in the Wissahickon School District that do not want to wear masks. I think the first thing, a survey needs to be sent out, and it can remain anonymous, asking whether they want to wear one or they prefer to wear one or they don't want to wear one. The other thing, with the results of the survey, it's pretty much split 50-50 for K-5. Why can't we consider, we have 4 elementary schools. Why can't we consider splitting, having 2 of them that, you know, the child wants to wear a mask, the parents want them to wear a mask, and have the other 2, you know, optional. If they want to wear one, they can. If they don't, they don't. You know, all this goes back to recommendations. None of this is mandated. I know that the K-5 kids are not old enough to get vaccinated. Again, it's a personal decision, as is mask wearing. It's not a law. It's not required. It's not mandated. It is recommended. And I think that a lot of parents are going to be very angry when it's just a cut and dry, no masking is required. And I don't think that's fair. I mean, we pay tax dollars. We are in a phenomenal school district. And I think that it needs to be considered to be able to have, you know, I think about segregation and stuff, but this is temporary. Hopefully COVID is temporary. You know, maybe next year we can go back to our homeschool. But I think that we need to start there. I think that it's not just a cut and dry, we're making this required. So, I mean, that's all I really have to say. Just a couple comments there with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Carmina Taylor.
Good evening. I would, if it's possible for the board questions, if we could get some more details on the ESSER funds that have been allocated for Wissahickon. I noticed that 90% of the money is going to salaries to maintain some of the COVID standards. And I was just wondering if we could get some more details and what is going to be formulated around the comprehensive plan. And the reason why I was astonished to hear that Paul didn't have any more details or plans out of that Race and Equity Committee meeting, because I was in the room when the superintendent presented his first report on the achievement gap attack plan. And at that time, in 2016, there were 7 Black students identified to be in the gifted program. That was over 5 years ago. I brought up the issue then, and I find that it's very interesting that you're talking about it now. And I think that the way that you have to address what has happened to the Black community, the Black and Brown community, but especially the Black community for decades in this district, is restorative justice. You have to make a concentrated effort to reinvest in the kids and the families and the decades of Black students that have been marginalized systemically by this district. And you could use that by incorporating a multi-pronged approach with your ESSER funds. And I just think that the public, and I'm also representing the Movement for Black and Brown Lives in Montgomery County, I'm going to all the school districts and asking them how are they effectively utilizing that ESSER funds, because this is a once in a lifetime opportunity to come up with a 3-year comprehensive plan. So I find it interesting between Tamia presenting, talking about the gifted program, knowing the statistics, knowing about the COVID slides, knowing about the kids that had Fs. We didn't even get whole numbers on the kids that had Fs or what kind of efforts are being made with that team. So I think that the public deserves more details about the specifics and how you're going to move forward, because this has been a decades-long systemic issue at Wissahickon. And the only way you can make it better is make an effort for restorative justice. So that's the answer. Whoever asked that question. And the assistant superintendent is in charge of all of that, what's happening into the schools. You can look at the PSSA, the outcomes to identify some gifted students that are already there. My son's friend was tested gifted in 3rd, 5th, and 8th grade years ago, and he was never brought out to be put in the gifted program. So I just would like to know if you could give more details about your ESSER plan, how you can incorporate the community, how you plan to restore justice in the Black community. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Maureen Boga. Maureen Boga.
Hello.
Hello. Yes, we can
Hello.
hear you. We can hear you.
Oh, hi. Yeah, I'd like to sort of comment on a similar topic that Colleen spoke earlier regarding the videos that were played last year during the History Month of February. And the videos that she was referring to really sort of just took me by surprise. So I don't think I spoke to anybody about it for a long time because I didn't know what to make of it. But they were quite controversial and filled with terminology that I never thought I would hear in my children's schools, because it really has nothing to do with education. They were terms such as white supremacy, white privilege, white fragility, implicit bias, systemic racism. And then the children were asked to decide and speak to how they were biased or racist, not if they were, but how they were. I just was shocked that the children would be put into these types of situations. And it brought much distress, I can tell you, into the home. It's not education. It's an ideology that was being taught as fact. These lessons were claimed to be based upon fact and truth. And the students were told in these videos that if they denied any of these stated assertions, they were showing inner racism and being hurtful to others. It did not allow for any discussion or dissension. It silenced those who didn't agree. It opened doors for abuse and bullying, which did occur outside that classroom, I can tell you that, to those who protested its content. It did the very opposite of unifying our students. I ask, how is this helping my children to learn? How is this creating a trusting and safe environment? You know, we speak to inclusion and safety in our school, but this really did the opposite. I did raise my concerns to this, but they did not really get addressed. So I say to the board administration, we parents have a right and a say in our children's education, and I would hope that you would listen and respond. I don't need to be told what is best for my child in regards to this type of indoctrination. The children, I know how to raise my children as good citizens, and these types of lessons have nothing to do with my children's academic education, and they don't belong in our school. You should be attentive to the needs of your parents and students and not to some personal social agenda. You have a duty to listen to parental concerns, and the parents should be heard. So I hope if more speak to you about this, that you actually respond. I haven't heard from anybody about it. It was a very distressing situation. I know there'll be more. I've been told there's more plans to have these types of education seminars to our children. And truthfully, I don't see how it's going to help my child succeed in her academic pursuits. It really only brought distrust and a lot of distress. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I don't see any other hands. So I'm going to close out the second public comment period, and we'll move on to board comments. Any comments from my fellow board members? Marshall, and then Ron, and then Tracy.
Yeah, Jim, I just would like a little clarification because I think there may be some confusion on the survey results. I heard several times that it was a 50-50 split between those who wanted a mask optional and those who wanted masks. I have written down here that it was about 4.5% who had no opinion. It was 44.4% who wanted masks optional, and I have 50.8% who wanted masks to be for school in the fall for K to 6. Could you just make sure that we're all on the same page in that regard?
You stated it correctly.
Okay, thank you.
Ron?
Yeah, that last item we heard about how all of our students are going to be screened for giftedness, I think is a fantastic idea. It will probably put a lot of stress on our staff, and I think if the board, if the administration will come to the board if they need additional people to help this, I'm quite sure that I know you would have my vote to move some extra money into this fund. This is a fantastic idea, and it would take the gatekeepers away from our students potentially getting into the gifted program. And it is a really fantastic step in the right direction. Thank you.
Tracy, and then Ronnie.
Thanks. So there was a couple of points made in regards to, if it gets voted in that the K-5 is going back with masks on, there were a couple of things that were brought up, making sure that we have more mask breaks, more outdoor time, with us going back, in August, September. We generally have warmer weather, so I'm hoping that we're putting a plan in place that we are getting the kids outside more, so that there aren't as much, there isn't as much time for them to be indoors with their masks on. Also, I wanted to make sure that, did you say that we will do that robocall for that Act 66, just so we can make sure that we get that out to everybody?
Yeah, I'm going to inquire tomorrow as to how we initially did it, and if we didn't, we'll do it again.
Okay. And then, I think I said about the HEPA filters. Could we get those videos that were being discussed tonight? Can we get those sent back to us again? I just want to rewatch them.
Yes.
Okay, Ronnie. And
I
then,
think that was it for me.
all right, Ronnie, and then Zeppi.
I just wanted to agree with Ron that universal gifted screening. So many kids slip through the cracks. This is a wonderful idea to do, and do it early. That's all.
Zeppi.
So I also have opinions about gifting. So gifted programs in New York City public school system, parents can self-select their children to be screened, and there's massive screenings that are done every single year. Granted, that's across the entire 5 boroughs. Everybody gets this option. But let us not over-index on gifted. I think I love that we offer the gifted program, but let's not make that the proxy for everything. Like making sure our high school kids have access to honors classes, access to AP classes. There's other things we also should put in the consideration set. Let's not over-index on one parameter, just because there's probably a whole host of kids who would benefit from a lot of the other amazing things that our school offers that we may not be as inclusive as we should be. So that's the only other add I have. Thank you.
I just want to say one thing. I don't know if this is different now, but in the elementary schools, when the gifted teacher would come into, say, a 4th grade classroom, they would do a gifted lesson for the entire class. So the gifted children would have their opportunities to have the gifted teacher there, but everyone in the class would participate, and that was awesome. So hopefully that keeps going.
Yeah, I just want to build off Zephy's point. I mean, I think it's very well taken. The gifted program and what we're doing with universal screening, I think, is fantastic and probably long overdue, but it only affects a small portion of our student population. And I think it is important that we also take a look at what we're doing more broadly across the rest of our academic program and offerings in general, in particular, honors and AP courses. We have similar lack of representation, in particular with our AP courses as well. And so one thing I think it's important to stress is that this was one topic or issue that was on the agenda of the Racial Equity Oversight Committee, but it was one of like a long laundry list. And we are going to kind of work our way through the list. And another one on that list in particular is the lack of representation in honors and AP courses as well. So, it's a great point. It's a very, very valid point. But this is hopefully just the start of a much broader, a more expansive process we're going to be undertaking to improve educational equity for all of our students throughout the entire district. Other comments? Student board reps, any comments you want to add? All right.
Joe, just to piggyback off of your last point, for those who are interested in the topic in general, tune into our committee meetings. We have a list of priorities. Unfortunately, we can't address everything in one time. We are taking them in a systematic order to have a hierarchy addressed, in order. And as we move forward, there will be more discussion, more details coming out, and more action items coming out to address the issues as they're identified and as we talk through them. But please, we participate. We welcome the input, and we look forward to moving in a very positive direction.
All right, seeing no further comments, I'm going to ask for a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.